He had everything: money, looks, and power. He was the type of man the world admired and feared. But when he decided to play games with the wrong woman, he discovered that some battles can't be won with charm and arrogance. She was strong, determined, and bowed to no one. In the game he thought he mastered, he was the one who lost. And this time, there was no going back. The afternoon sun painted the vast vineyards of Golden Ridge Winery golden as Ethan Montgomery observed his inheritance through the enormous windows of his penthouse. At 35, he was considered the country's most eligible bachelor. It was no wonder. Besides his classic good looks, piercing green eyes, well-defined jawline, and athletic build, he was the heir to an empire that raked in billions annually. "Mr. Montgomery, Business and Power magazine is waiting for your interview," announced his assistant Melissa, interrupting his thoughts. Ethan adjusted his Italian silk tie and smiled at his reflection in the mirrored glass. Another interview, another opportunity to feed his carefully constructed image. "You can send them in, Melissa. And prepare champagne, please. The French 1982, he ordered, without taking his eyes off his reflection. The assistant nodded discreetly and left, already accustomed to her boss's eccentricities. The interviewer, an ambitious young woman named Patricia Sanders, entered the room accompanied by a photographer. Her eyes sparkled upon seeing Ethan, as happened with practically all women who crossed his path. He found them too predictable. "Mr. Montgomery, it's a huge pleasure. Our magazine is doing a special feature on Golden Ridge Winery's 40th anniversary," Patricia began, nervously adjusting her hair. "Please call me Ethan," he responded with his rehearsed smile, the one that had already appeared on dozens of magazine covers. "And accept a glass of champagne. It's a special vintage, just like this interview." For the next hour, Ethan conducted the conversation like a maestro. He spoke about the winery's history, founded by his grandfather, an Italian immigrant who had transformed a small plot of land into one of the largest wine producers in the Southern Hemisphere. He mentioned plans for international expansion, strategic partnerships with French wineries, and of course his vision for the company's future. What he didn't mention were the empty nights in his luxurious penthouse, the distant relationship with his mother, Diana, a woman who had turned protecting the family name into an obsession, or the fact that he couldn't remember the last time he had felt something genuine for someone. After the interview, Melissa entered the room again. "Your mother called 3 times today. She insists that you attend the charity dinner next week." Ethan sighed, pouring himself more champagne. "What does she want this time?" "Apparently there's a new important family in the wine business wanting to do business. They have a daughter." "Of course they do," he interrupted, rolling his eyes. "My mother never misses an opportunity to try to push some suitable prospect on me." Later, while driving his Porsche through the city center streets, Ethan reflected on his life. He had everything money could buy, but something was missing. Not that he would admit that to himself. It was easier to follow the script, he knew so. Well, exclusive parties, fleeting affairs with models and actresses, headlines in celebrity magazines. He parked in front of one of the most expensive restaurants in the city, where he would meet some friends, if he could call them that. They were more like supporting actors in his private show, people who flattered him in exchange for crumbs of his attention and prestige. "Ethan, darling," exclaimed Vanessa, a socialite who had already tried unsuccessfully to win him over. "We saw your photo at Sunday's party. Why didn't you stay longer?" He smiled politely, thinking about how all these people were interchangeable. Same smiles, same designer clothes, same superficial topics. As he ordered a bottle of wine, not a Golden Ridge, he never drank his own brand in public, he observed the street movement through the restaurant window. It was then that something unusual caught his attention. Across the street, a woman was carrying several fabric bags, walking with difficulty. She was different from all the people who frequented his social circle. She was a plus-size woman, dressed simply but elegantly, and her face showed a serenity that contrasted with the artificial smiles surrounding him. Something about that scene intrigued him. For a moment, he completely forgot about the conversation. At his table, the admiring glances and the forced laughter, he watched as she entered a small shop with a discreet sign, "Dreams and Stitches Atelier." Olivia Martinez adjusted the newly arrived fabrics in her space at Dreams and Stitches Atelier, while smiling contentedly at the new possibilities these materials would bring. At 32, she had built a solid reputation among her clients for her extraordinary ability to create dresses that flattered women of all body types. "Olivia, you should have seen Mrs. Wilson's face when she tried on the dress you made," commented Rachel, her atelier colleague. "She cried with emotion, said she had never felt so beautiful." A smile lit up Olivia's face. This was why she loved her work. She didn't just create clothes, but helped restore her clients' self-esteem. In a world obsessed with impossible beauty standards, she fought to show that elegance had no size. "You know, Rachel, every dress I make carries a little bit of this mission," Olivia responded, running her hands over a navy blue silk fabric. "I want all women to feel special, regardless of the size they wear." On the other side of the atelier, Richard observed the scene with a sideways glance. As a junior designer, he didn't hide his envy of Olivia's success. His designs were technically perfect, but they lacked the soul that Olivia imprinted on her creations. "Talking about your mission again," Richard provoked, approaching. "You should worry less about social causes and more about fashion trends." Olivia took a deep breath, maintaining her serene smile. "Everyone has their own path. Richard, mine is to make inclusive fashion." At that moment, the atelier door opened, and Olivia couldn't believe her eyes. It was him, the man she had seen a few times on magazine covers, the famous heir to Golden Ridge. Ethan Montgomery in person, standing there in her workplace. "Good afternoon," he said, with his deep, melodious voice. "I'm looking for Olivia Martinez." The entire atelier seemed to freeze. Richard dropped a pair of scissors which made a metallic noise as they hit the floor. Rachel choked on the coffee she was drinking. "That's me," Olivia responded, maintaining her composure despite her racing heart. Ethan examined her from head to toe, and for a moment Olivia felt the weight of all the prejudices she had faced in life. But there was something different in his gaze. Curiosity, perhaps. "I've heard about your work," he lied, with a smile that could melt glaciers. "I'd like to order some dresses for a friend." Olivia nodded, professional as always. "Of course. We can schedule an appointment to discuss the details and your friend's measurements." "Actually," Ethan stepped forward, lowering his voice, "I thought we could discuss this over coffee. This afternoon, perhaps." The entire atelier seemed to hold its breath. Olivia felt Richard's envious gaze burning into her back, Rachel's surprise, the buzz of the other seamstresses. For an instant, she wanted to refuse. She knew the fashion world too well not to recognize when something seemed too good to be true. But there was something about that moment that made her hesitate. Her whole life had been dedicated to proving that beauty and worth came in all sizes and shapes. It would be hypocrisy to let her own fears and insecurities prevent her from accepting a simple coffee. "All right," she finally responded. "I know a cafe nearby." "Excellent," Ethan smiled, handing her a card. "But I prefer a more private place. This is the address of a cafe in the West Side neighborhood. Can we meet at 5? After he left, the atelier exploded with comments and speculations. Richard didn't hide his contempt. Rachel was worried, and the other seamstresses were divided between excitement and suspicion. "Olivia, you're not really going, are you?" Rachel asked in a low voice. "This is very strange. Why would someone like him come here?" "Maybe he really does need dresses for a friend," Olivia replied, but even she didn't fully believe that. As she finished her tasks for the day, Olivia couldn't stop thinking about the meeting. She looked at herself in the atelier mirror. Her wavy brown hair framed a face she had always considered ordinary, but which carried its own beauty in her sincere smile. She wore a dress she had created herself, in a shade of green that enhanced her olive skin. Villa Toscana Cafe was one of those discreet and elegant places frequented by the city's elite. When Olivia arrived, precisely at 5 o'clock, she felt out of place among the rare orchid arrangements and imported porcelain cups. A hostess examined her from head to toe before leading her to the table where Ethan was already waiting. "Punctual," he commented, standing up politely. "A rare quality these days." Olivia smiled, adjusting herself in the burgundy velvet chair. "I believe respect starts with punctuality." Ethan made a gesture, and immediately a waiter appeared. "The house special coffee for the lady, and a double espresso for me," he ordered, without consulting the menu or asking Olivia's preference. "Actually," she gently interrupted, "I prefer chamomile tea with honey, if possible." The waiter hesitated, looking at Ethan, who seemed momentarily disconcerted. It was probably the first time in a long time that someone had contradicted one of his decisions, even in something so simple. "Of course, as you prefer," he quickly recovered. "So, about, the dresses?" "Yes." Olivia leaned slightly forward. "Could you tell me more about your friend? Her style, preferences, measurements?" Ethan ran his hand through his perfectly arranged hair, a gesture that Olivia noticed was more habit than necessity. "Actually, Olivia, may I call you Olivia? The dresses were just a pretext." "I figured," she responded with a calmness that surprised him. "The question is, a pretext for what?" The tea and coffee arrived, creating a pause in the conversation. Olivia observed how Ethan seemed slightly uncomfortable with her frankness. She was used to reading people. It was an essential part of her work to understand not just the bodies, but also the personalities of her clients. "You intrigued me," he admitted, leaning forward. "There's something different about you, an authenticity that is rare in my world." Olivia took a sip of her tea, carefully thinking about her response. "Mr. Montgomery—" "Ethan, please." "Ethan," she continued, "I'll be direct. People like you don't usually take an interest in people like me unless there's some hidden motive." He laughed, a rich and melodious sound that attracted glances from neighboring tables. "And what if the motive is simply to meet someone who isn't desperate to impress me?" "Then it would be ironic," Olivia responded, "because being here in this elegant cafe playing this game of mystery seems very much like an attempt to impress." For the first time, Ethan seemed genuinely surprised. People didn't usually challenge him like this, much less see through his rehearsed tactics. "Are you always this honest?" "Always," she smiled. "It's easier than maintaining appearances." The conversation flowed to other topics. Olivia talked about her work, her dreams of democratizing fashion, her struggles against the industry's prejudices. To his own surprise, Ethan found himself genuinely interested. There was a passion in her words that was contagious. "Last week, a client came to me," she recounted, her eyes shining. She had an important wedding to attend, but all the stores only offered models that made her feel inadequate. When she tried on the dress I made, she cried, said that for the first time she didn't feel invisible. "And is that common? Women crying in your atelier?" "More than it should be," Olivia responded with a touch of sadness. "We live in a world that makes women feel wrong for being who they are. My job is to show them that they are perfect exactly as they are." Ethan felt something strange in his chest, a mixture of admiration and guilt. How many times had he himself been part of this system that Olivia was fighting to change? How many women had he judged based solely on their appearance? "And you?" she suddenly asked. "What makes you cry, Ethan Montgomery?" The question caught him completely off guard. No one had ever been interested in his real vulnerabilities. People wanted to know about his money, his lifestyle, his conquests, never about his emotions. "I don't know," he answered honestly, for the first time that afternoon. Olivia checked her watch. "I need to get back to the atelier. I have a client in half an hour. Can we see each other again?" Ethan asked, and was surprised to find that he really wanted a positive answer. "Why?" Olivia questioned, standing up. "To continue your social experiment with the chubby seamstress?" The words hit him like a slap. That was exactly what he had initially planned, wasn't it? A game, a temporary amusement. But now, looking at her, he wasn't so sure anymore. Back at the atelier, Olivia found Rachel anxious for news. The buzz among the seamstresses was evident, and even Richard seemed more attentive than normal to her movements. But it was only at the end of the day, when most had already left, that Olivia shared the details of the meeting with her friend. "He's exactly as I imagined," Olivia confided, organizing her patterns. "Charming, self-assured, and completely used to getting everything he wants." Rachel approached, concerned. "And what do you think he wants from you?" At the beginning of the meeting, it was clear that it was some kind of game for him, Olivia sighed, remembering Ethan's look. But something changed during our conversation. It was as if for a moment his mask had cracked. "Olivia, you're not falling for him, are you?" The question hung in the air like lavender perfume, Olivia's favorite for her most special creations. She paused for a moment, reflecting. "Don't be silly," she finally replied. "I know my place in the world very well. Men like Ethan Montgomery don't fall in love with women like me." "And why not?" Rachel questioned, indignant. "You're amazing, talented, intelligent. You have a huge heart." "And I'm fat," Olivia completed bluntly. "In a world where he only relates to models and socialites, I would be at most a passing curiosity." On the other side of the room, Richard pretended to organize fabrics while listening to the conversation. A malicious smile formed on his lips. That information could be useful for his plans. Meanwhile, in the Golden Ridge penthouse, Ethan couldn't concentrate on work. Olivia's words echoed in his mind. To continue your social experiment with the chubby seamstress? How had she been able to read his intentions so accurately? "Mr. Montgomery?" Melissa interrupted his thoughts. "Your mother is on line 3. It's the 4th time she's called today." Ethan sighed deeply before answering. "Hi, Mom." "Ethan, darling, where have you been? We have the charity dinner next week and we need to discuss some details." Diana Montgomery's voice sounded controlled as always. The Rothschild's daughter confirmed her attendance and— "Mom," he interrupted, "I'm not interested in another one of your attempts to push suitable prospects on me." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Diana Montgomery wasn't used to being contradicted, especially by her son. "Suitable," she repeated coldly. "And what kind of woman would you consider unsuitable, Ethan?" The image of Olivia appeared in his mind, her sincere smile, the way her eyes shone when she talked about her work. Why was he thinking about her now? "I need to hang up, Mom. I have an important meeting." The next day, Olivia was concentrating on a new project when Richard approached her table. "So, Prince Charming didn't show up today," he provoked. "I thought after yesterday's coffee—" "Richard," Olivia interrupted him without taking her eyes off her work, "I don't have time for your provocations today. This client needs the dress for next week." "I'm just worried about you," he continued with false sweetness. "It would be terrible if something embarrassing happened. You know how the press loves a scandal." Olivia finally raised her eyes, facing him. "Are you threatening me, Richard?" "Imagine," he laughed, walking away, "just warning a friend." That afternoon, to everyone's surprise, Ethan appeared again at the atelier. This time, he brought a bouquet of white roses. "They're beautiful," Hannah commented as she received them, "but unnecessary." "Why unnecessary?" "Because flowers are safe gifts," she replied honestly. "They're what you give when you don't really know a person." Ethan smiled, starting to get used to her disconcerting frankness. "And what should I have brought?" "How about honesty?" Hannah suggested, placing the flowers in an improvised vase. "Why are you really here, Ethan?" He hesitated, observing how she moved gracefully between sewing tables, greeting colleagues, adjusting fabrics. There was a natural dignity in her gestures that intrigued him more and more. "Because I can't stop thinking about our conversation," he finally admitted. "You made me question things I'd never questioned before." Hannah stopped what she was doing, surprised by his honesty. "And that scares you?" "Maybe," he answered, and for the first time in a long time, he wasn't trying to impress anyone. "Have dinner with me tonight?" The restaurant Ethan chose was on the top floor of one of the most luxurious buildings in the city. Through the glass walls, New York City sparkled like a sea of urban stars. Hannah observed the view, aware of the curious glances from other patrons. Some of surprise, others of poorly disguised judgment. "You're uncomfortable," Ethan observed as the sommelier served a red wine from Golden Hills. "It's not discomfort," Hannah corrected, adjusting the linen napkin on her lap. "It's awareness. Awareness that we're in different worlds, and that you deliberately chose a place where that would be evident." Ethan frowned, picking up his wineglass. "Do you always analyze everything so deeply?" "I need to. When you live in a body that the world insists on judging, you learn to read between the lines of every situation." Hannah tasted the wine, appreciating its flavor. "This is exceptional, by the way." 2015 vintage? It was Ethan's turn to be surprised. How did you know? I researched your vineyard after we met, she admitted with a smile. 2015 was a particularly good year for wines from the valley. The weather cooperated uniquely. The conversation flowed naturally, covering various topics. Hannah talked about her dreams of revolutionizing plus-size fashion, about the stories of overcoming her clients had. Ethan, for the first time, shared some insecurities about the weight of carrying the family legacy. You know what's ironic, he commented, already on his second glass of wine. I never really wanted to work with wines. When I was a teenager, I dreamed of being a photographer. And why didn't you follow that dream? My mother, he hesitated, playing with a napkin. She has a very particular way of seeing the world. For her, there are things that are appropriate for a Pearson and things that aren't. Like having dinner with a plus-size seamstress? Hannah provoked with a gentle smile. Ethan stared at her, feeling a pang of guilt. Do you always define yourself like that? By your appearance? No, she answered serenely. I define myself by what I do, by what I believe, by the lives I try to improve through my work. But it would be naive to ignore how the world sees me. The dinner continued, and Ethan found himself increasingly fascinated. Hannah had strong opinions about art, politics, society. She wasn't trying to impress him. On the contrary, she often challenged him with views completely different from his own. When dessert arrived, Hannah noticed something strange. A group of people at a nearby table kept looking in their direction and making comments in low voices. One of them was discreetly holding a cell phone, as if taking photos. I think they're photographing us, she commented casually. Ethan immediately tensed up. Do you want me to ask them to stop? No, Hannah smiled, tasting her dessert with deliberate calm. Let them photograph. Maybe some plus-size girls will see these photos and realize they can occupy any space they desire. At that moment, Ethan's phone vibrated. It was a message from his mother. We need to talk urgently. I saw the photos that are circulating. He put the phone back in his pocket, trying to ignore the message. But Hannah noticed his change in mood. Problems? She asked. Nothing important, he lied, asking for the check. As they left the restaurant, they were surprised by some photographers who seemed to be waiting for them. The flashes fired immediately, momentarily blinding them. Ethan, is it true you're dating? How did your mother react to the new relationship? What's your name, miss? How did you meet? Hannah felt Ethan tense up beside her. She noticed how he instinctively moved away a bit, as if wanting to create distance between them in the photos. Your car is right there, he murmured, pointing to the valet who was already bringing the Porsche. Don't worry, Hannah responded quietly. I won't embarrass you by answering any questions. When the valet opened the car door for her, Hannah turned to Ethan. Thank you for dinner. It was educational. Educational? He asked, confused. Yes, she smiled, but there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. Sometimes we need reminders of who we are and where we belong. Before he could respond, she got into the car and closed the door. Ethan stood there watching the vehicle drive away, while the photographers continued firing flashes. His phone vibrated again. This time it was a message from Marie. Your mother is on her way to your penthouse. She seems furious. Elizabeth Pearson was a woman who commanded respect with her mere presence. Tall, elegant, with impeccably styled grey hair, she entered Ethan's penthouse like a storm contained in a bottle of French perfume. Explain yourself, she demanded, throwing a gossip magazine on the coffee table. On the cover, a photo of Ethan and Hannah leaving the restaurant. Headlined, The Wine Prince and the Plus-Size Cinderella, a Modern Fairy Tale. Ethan poured himself some whiskey, trying to stay calm. There's nothing to explain, Mum. I had dinner with an interesting person. Interesting, Elizabeth laughed humorlessly. Our competitors are loving this. The heir to Golden Hills turned into a joke on social media. Do you have any idea what you're doing to our reputation? Our reputation? Ethan felt anger rising. Or your control over my life. Don't be childish, Elizabeth cut him off. You're not a rebellious teenager anymore. You're the face of an empire. Every move you make affects hundreds of employees, business partners, shareholders. and dating someone outside the standards. You approve of would ruin all that? He challenged. Elizabeth softened her expression, changing tactics. Darling, don't misunderstand me. I have nothing against this girl. She seems to be a good person. But you need to think about your future, your position. Meanwhile, at the atelier, Hannah was facing her own battles. The photos had spread quickly, and the work environment was electrified with comments and speculations. Hannah! Rachel ran to her table as soon as she arrived. You're on all the gossip sites. How was the dinner? Why didn't you tell me? Before she could answer, Ryan approached with a malicious smile. Our celebrity has arrived. Should I bow or would a curtsy be more appropriate? Ryan, please, Hannah sighed, organizing her materials. I have work to do. Work? He laughed. I thought now that you're the new girlfriend of the wine prince, you wouldn't need to worry about that anymore. Enough! Hannah's voice sounded firmer than usual, making everyone around stop. My personal life is not the business of this atelier. I have 3 dresses to deliver this week, and that's what I'm going to focus on. But it was impossible to completely ignore the situation. Clients started arriving, some clearly more interested in meeting Ethan Pearson's new girlfriend than in ordering dresses. The phone wouldn't stop ringing with journalists requesting interviews. In the middle of the afternoon, Hannah received a message from Ethan. We need to talk. Can I stop by after work? She replied simply, Not today. I need time to think. Back at the vineyard, Ethan was facing a tense meeting with the board of directors. The company's stocks had fluctuated slightly after the photos, and some more conservative board members expressed concern about the brand image. Gentlemen, Ethan interrupted a particularly heated discussion. Are we really dedicating an entire meeting to my personal life? Your personal life impacts the company, Mr. Pearson, replied one of the older board members, especially when it becomes national headlines. That night, alone in his penthouse, Ethan reflected on how his life had turned upside down in such a short time. He picked up his phone several times, thinking about calling Hannah, but something held him back. That's when he received an unexpected message from Marie. Boss, I think you should see this. The link she sent led to a fashion blog. Hannah had given a short interview, her only public statement on the matter. I'm not a fairy tale or a story. Of overcoming, she said in the text. I'm a professional who loves her work and believes that all people deserve to feel beautiful and respected, regardless of their size or social class. If my recent exposure serves to open this discussion, great, but I won't allow my life to be turned into a spectacle, or my image to be used to promote prejudices, either against me or against Ethan Pearson. Ethan read and reread the interview several times. Every word seemed to carry the weight of the truth he had been trying to ignore. Hannah was much stronger and more dignified than any of those who judged her, including himself. The silence between Hannah and Ethan lasted a whole week, a week in which both immersed themselves in their routines, trying to ignore the whirlwind their lives had become. At the atelier, Hannah found refuge in her work, creating some of her best dresses. At the vineyard, Ethan buried himself in meetings and reports, as if numbers and spreadsheets could silence his conflicting thoughts. It was Ryan who broke the fragile balance of that week. During a particularly busy afternoon at the atelier, he approached Hannah's table with a brown envelope in his hands. You know, Hannah, he began, with fake concern in his voice, I've always admired your naivety. But sometimes we need to open the eyes of those we esteem. Hannah continued sewing, trying to ignore him, but Ryan placed the envelope on her fabric. What is this? She asked, finally looking up. Let's say they're proof that your Prince Charming isn't so charming after all, he smiled, walking away. Inside the envelope, Hannah found screenshots of WhatsApp conversations. They were messages exchanged between Ethan and some friends, dated the day he met her. Her heart tightened as she read the content. I need to have some fun, Ethan said in one of the messages. I found the perfect entertainment, a chubby seamstress who thinks she's all that. It'll be interesting to see how far I can go with this game. The responses from his friends were even worse, filled with malicious jokes and encouragement for him to film everything so they could laugh about it later. Hannah felt the world spin. Her hands trembled as she held the papers. Rachel, noticing her agitation, approached worriedly. "What happened? You're pale." "I need some air," Hannah murmured, getting up abruptly. "Can you take care of my clients today?" Meanwhile, at the vineyard, Ethan was facing his own crisis. Elizabeth had organized a business dinner with important international investors, and among the guests was Sophie Rothschild, the suitor his mother so wanted him to meet. "She's perfect," Elizabeth insisted, while adjusting her son's tie. "Traditional. Family studied in Paris, understands everything about wines." Ethan observed his reflection in the mirror, but he no longer recognized himself. Who was this man in an impeccable suit and rehearsed smile? The same one who had mocked Hannah in those shameful messages that now haunted him. The dinner was proceeding exactly as his mother had planned. Sophie was truly impressive, elegant, articulate, perfectly suited to the role she was supposed to play. But with each minute of polite conversation, Ethan felt more suffocated. "The blend you developed for the special vintage is fascinating," Sophie commented, swirling the wineglass with studied precision. "The combination of grapes is bold, but it works perfectly." That's when something snapped inside him. He remembered Hannah tasting his wine, how she had genuinely appreciated the flavor, without pretension or affectation. He remembered their honest conversations, how she challenged him to be truthful. "Excuse me." He abruptly stood up from the table, ignoring his mother's mortified look. "I need to resolve something urgent." He drove to the atelier, but found only Rachel closing up the place. "Hannah left early," she informed him coldly, "and if you're responsible for the state she left here in, I suggest you keep your distance." "What are you talking about?" "Ask your friend Ryan," Rachel answered, locking the door. "He seemed very satisfied with the chaos he caused today." Ethan felt a chill down his spine. Ryan, the envious employee Hannah had mentioned, could he have? His suspicions were confirmed when he got home and found an anonymous message on his phone. Screenshots of the same conversations Hannah had, seen accompanied by a note. "Maybe your mother would be interested in knowing what kind of game you've been playing. How much is silence worth?" For the first time in his life, Ethan Pearson felt true shame for himself. Not for the threat of blackmail, but because he finally saw the extent of his own cruelty. The words he had written in those messages, words that at the time seemed just silly fun among friends, now revealed a facet of his personality that he could no longer ignore. He tried calling Hannah repeatedly, but she didn't answer. Finally, he received a short message. "Now I understand why you needed a discreet place for our first coffee. Congratulations, Ethan. Your game worked perfectly." The following days were a test of endurance for Hannah. Every client who entered the atelier seemed to bring with them that look of pity she so detested. But contrary to what many expected, she didn't hide. She continued her work with even more dedication, transforming her pain into creativity. "You won't believe what I found out," Rachel approached her table one morning, speaking in a low voice. "Ryan didn't get those messages alone. It seems he has a contact at the vineyard, someone close to Ethan." Hannah continued sewing, her skilled fingers guiding the fabric with precision. "It doesn't matter how he got them, Rachel. What matters is that they were true." "But Hannah, you know what's ironic?" Hannah interrupted, finally stopping her work. "I always knew something was wrong. From the first day, my instinct screamed that it was all too artificial. But I chose to believe that for the first time someone was seeing me beyond appearance." On the other side of the city, Ethan was facing his own crisis of conscience. After a sleepless night, he made a decision that surprised everyone. He called a press conference. Elizabeth was horrified when she found out. "Have you lost your mind? You're going to expose our family even more." "No, Mum," he replied with a calmness he didn't feel. "I'm going to do the only honest thing I've done in a long time." The Golden Hills conference room was packed. Journalists from various outlets jostled, waiting for some statement about the alleged relationship that had become national headline news. What they received, however, was something completely different. "I'm here today," Ethan began, his voice firm despite his nervousness, "to do something I should have done a long time ago. Apologize, not just to Hannah Martinez, but to all the people I've ever judged, belittled, or treated as less important." for not fitting into the standards that I arrogantly considered appropriate. A murmur ran through the room, flashes fired non-stop. The messages that have come to light, he continued, show a side of me that I'm not proud of, but it would be hypocrisy on my part to try to deny or justify them. They are real, as was my initial intention to make Hannah a diversion. Elizabeth, seated in the front row, closed her eyes in despair, but Ethan continued. What I didn't expect was that Hannah, with her authenticity and strength, would show me how empty I was. Every moment with her was a lesson in dignity, in being true to oneself and to others, and I failed miserably to learn those lessons in time. At the atelier, everyone was watching the press conference on Rachel's cell phone. Hannah, who was trying to concentrate on her work, couldn't help but hear Ethan's words. I'm not here asking for forgiveness, he went on. Some actions don't deserve forgiveness. I'm here taking responsibility and announcing concrete changes. From today, Golden Hills will invest in inclusion and diversity programs, starting with a partnership with stylists and brands that promote inclusive fashion. Ryan, who was watching the transmission from his desk, visibly paled. His blackmail plan had just crumbled. There was no way to threaten someone who voluntarily exposed their own mistakes. But the biggest surprise was yet to come. After the press conference, Emily, Ethan's assistant, sought out Hannah at the atelier. Ms. Martinez, she began formally, I came personally to deliver this. It was a folder containing evidence that Ryan had been sabotaging not only Hannah, but several other atelier employees. Altered emails, measurements changed on patterns, malicious comments planted, everything meticulously documented. How did you get this? Hannah asked, surprised. Let's just say Ryan chose his allies poorly. Emily smiled discreetly. He approached me wanting information about Mr. Hawkins, offering a partnership. I simply accepted and documented everything. That afternoon, Hannah gathered the atelier team and exposed all the evidence. Ryan, cornered by his own schemes, had no choice but to resign. 3 months passed since the press conference. The atelier, now free from Ryan's toxic presence, had transformed into an even more welcoming environment. Hannah, driven by new energy, dedicated herself to expanding her vision of inclusive fashion, and her work was beginning to gain national recognition. You won't believe it, exclaimed Rachel, bursting breathlessly into the atelier one Monday morning. Style and Power magazine wants to do a feature on you, a cover. Hannah looked up from the dress she was adjusting. About me or about the scandal? About you, your work, your influence on inclusive fashion. They saw the photos from that charity fashion show you organized last month. They say they've never seen anything like it. The fashion show in question had been a milestone. Hannah had gathered real women, her clients, to present her creations. Executives, teachers, doctors, housewives, all walking with confidence and elegance, showing that beauty had no single size or shape. During the same period, Golden Hills Winery was also undergoing transformations. Ethan, to the surprise of many, was fulfilling his promises. The inclusion program wasn't just marketing. He had hired specialized consultants and was implementing real changes in the company. Your son has gone mad, one of the oldest board members commented to Diana after a particularly heated meeting. Wasting money on these social initiatives. Diana, however, observed the changes with different eyes. For the first time in years, she saw her son truly involved with something beyond profits and company image. And, more surprisingly, the winery's stock was rising. The public was responding positively to the brand's new stance. On a particularly busy afternoon, Hannah received an unexpected visit at the atelier. Diana Hawkins, elegant as always, walked through the door with the same haughty posture as always, but there was something different in her eyes. Ms. Martinez, she began, sitting in the chair Hannah indicated. I came personally because I believe some conversations need to be had face to face. Hannah continued her work, sewing with the same serenity as always. How can I help you, Mrs. Hawkins? You transformed my son, Diana declared after a moment of silence. And I'm not just talking about the scandal or the changes in the company. For the first time in his life, I see Ethan being genuine. With all due respect, Hannah replied, finally stopping her work, Your son transformed himself. Sometimes we need to see ourselves through the wrong eyes to finally see our own mistakes. Diana nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. You know, when I found out he was dating you, I was horrified. Not because of who you are, but because of what I thought I knew about you. Now I realize that prejudice blinds us not only to others, but to ourselves. Did you come all the way here to tell me this? No, Diana replied, opening her designer handbag. I came because I need a dress, and I want it made by you. Hannah raised her eyebrows, surprised. A dress? For next week's charity dinner. It will be an event in partnership with an NGO that promotes female self-esteem and empowerment. It was Ethan's idea. As they discussed fabrics and models, Hannah realized how life had curious paths. There was Diana Hawkins, the woman who once saw her as a threat, now talking about colors and cuts with genuine interest. At the end of the afternoon, after Diana left with measurements taken and the model chosen, Hannah found an envelope on her desk. Inside was a formal invitation to the charity dinner and a handwritten note. Your work deserves to be seen and celebrated. Your presence at the event is not a request for forgiveness. Those have already been given, and it's up to you to accept them or not. It is a recognition of your value as a professional and as a person. Diana Hawkins. Hannah put the invitation in her drawer, thoughtful. In the past few months, she had dedicated herself so much to proving her worth through work that she had almost forgotten how it all began. Ethan's messages, which had hurt her so much, now seemed to belong to another life. Will you accept? Asked Rachel, who had observed the whole scene. I don't know yet, Hannah answered honestly, but for the first time I feel like the decision is really mine. It's not about Ethan, it's not about his mother, it's not about proving anything to anyone. It's about choosing my own path. The ballroom of the city's most luxurious hotel was unrecognizable. For Golden Hill's charity dinner, Ethan had insisted on a decoration that deviated from the traditional. Instead of the usual round tables with white tablecloths, the environment had been transformed into a living art gallery, with huge photographs showing real women of different bodies, ages, and ethnicities, all wearing creations by independent designers. Diana Hawkins, wearing a stunning midnight blue dress created by Hannah, greeted guests with renewed grace. The dress, with its elegant cut and delicate details, had made headlines in several fashion magazines, not for the status of who wore it, but for the perfection of its execution. Your seamstress is truly extraordinary, commented a socialite, admiring the drape of the fabric. Is she here tonight? Diana smiled, remembering her last conversation with Hannah. That, she replied diplomatically, is a decision that's entirely up to her. On the other side of the city, in her modest but cozy apartment, Hannah was putting the finishing touches on her own creation, an emerald green dress she had designed especially for that night. On her bed lay the invitation to the charity, dinner still unanswered. You look beautiful, said Rachel, who had insisted on helping her get ready. But you can still change your mind, you know. Hannah looked at herself in the mirror, admiring how the dress accentuated her curves without trying to hide them. I'm not going for him, Rachel. I'm going for myself. The chatter in the ballroom diminished considerably when Hannah entered, not out of embarrassment, as had happened months ago, but out of genuine admiration that her presence commanded. She walked through the room with the same serene dignity as always, occasionally stopping to greet acquaintances and admire the photographs. Ethan, who was giving a speech about the winery's new social projects, momentarily lost his train of thought when he saw her. Hannah looked stunning, but it wasn't just her physical beauty that caught attention. It was the quiet confidence that emanated from her, the certainty of someone who had finally found their place in the world. After the speech, he tried to approach her, but was interrupted by a man who was animatedly conversing with Hannah. It was Paul Sanders, a famous fashion editor known for his work with inclusive brands. Ms. Martinez, Paul spoke with evident enthusiasm. Your creations are exactly what the market needs. I'd like to discuss a possible partnership for a complete clothing line. Hannah smiled, genuinely surprised and happy. That would be a dream come true, Mr. Sanders. I've always admired your work in democratizing fashion. It was only later, during a quieter moment of the event, that Ethan finally managed to get a moment alone with Hannah. He found her on the ballroom's balcony, admiring the view of the city. "Your dress is incredible," he commented, maintaining a respectful distance. "Thank you," she replied without turning around. "Your mother looks stunning as well." "Hannah," he began, but she gently interrupted him. "You know, Ethan, I spent a lot of time trying to understand why things happened the way they did. But I realized that sometimes we don't need to understand everything. Sometimes we just need to accept that certain people enter our lives to teach us something, and then go their own way." "And what did I teach you?" he asked, his voice laden with regret. "That I was stronger than I thought," she smiled, finally turning to face him. "And you? What did you learn?" "That sometimes we need to lose something valuable to understand." "It's true worth," he answered honestly, "and that some people transform us even without trying." They stood in silence for a moment, the sound of the party reaching them muffled on the balcony. Hannah was the first to speak. "I saw the projects you've been developing at the winery. They're important initiatives." "They were inspired by you," he admitted. "Your way of seeing the world changed my perspective forever." "I'm glad to hear that," she replied sincerely. "It means that this whole story, as painful as it was, served a greater purpose." Paul Sanders appeared on the balcony, excusing himself. "Hannah, may I steal a moment of your time? There are some people I'd like you to meet." "Of course," she smiled, beginning to move away. But before she left, she turned to Ethan one last time. "You know what's the true beauty of accepting ourselves as we are? It's that we've finally become free to be who we were meant to be." As he watched her walk away, Ethan understood that some stories don't need a conventional happy ending to be meaningful. Hannah had taught him that true love begins with self-love, and that some people mark us not by staying in our lives, but by completely transforming us before they leave. Diana found her son still on the balcony, contemplative. "She is extraordinary, isn't she?" "Yes," he agreed, "and I was a fool not to realize that from the beginning." "No, son," Diana smiled, gently touching his arm. "You were human, and you finally learned to be a better human." Inside the ballroom, Hannah was the center of attention, discussing her ideas to revolutionize fashion with people who finally saw her for her talent. Her smile was radiant, not because she needed to prove something to anyone, but because she was finally living her dreams on her own terms. And so on a night that celebrated transformations, both Hannah and Ethan understood that sometimes the true happy ending isn't in staying together, but in becoming better for having known each other.